There is a delicious moment on the new album, The Incident, when about halfway through the storm clouds lift and suddenly there's this incredible blaze of light in the form of this astonishing anthemic epic track that you've called Time Flies. Time Flies seems to simultaneously divide and unite the other tracks on the album, and to me embodies everything that fans love about Porcupine Tree. Tell me about Time Flies.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It's one of those things. I think I was writing so much about the darker side of life, and I was writing about a fairly, things that were quite detached from my life. I was writing about things I was picking up from media. And it's one of those things when I think when you write about those kind of things, or in fact when you write about anything, in fact, as a songwriter or a novelist or anything, there's almost a sense you have to allow the kind of negativity that's actually inside all of us. But as a writer, you have to allow that to very much rise to the surface to be able to tap into it. And I did write for a few weeks about these really ugly, quite negative, quite disturbing things as part of the incident. And I got to this point where I just think I needed to write something that was completely from my heart and completely from a more sentimental, more romantic place. So I started to write this song for whatever reason about incidents from my own childhood that I had incredibly vivid and rather sentimental and nostalgic feelings about. And it's interesting that we've been talking about this, this album, this great era for the album as an art form. So I was born in 1967, and this was a year, I think, by anybody's standards, that you'd have to say was the beginning of everything we understand about, the modern rock era. This was the year of Sgt. Pepper. This was the year of the first Hendrix album, the first Floyd album, the first Doors album. It was the summer of love. Everything we understand today about modern rock music really started in 1967. And I do have this quite romantic notion that the fact I was born in this year is somehow significant. Almost, like people are superstitious about their star sign. Well, I'm superstitious about the fact I was born in what arguably is the most important year in the history of rock music. And so I started to write this rather sentimental song, and I had a very idyllic childhood. I grew up in the suburbs of London. I had wonderful parents, and I have wonderful memories of long, hot summers in the school holidays growing up in the suburbs of London. And I started to write this song, Time Flies, which, as you say, is almost like an oasis in this desert of negativity, because it's a very beautiful, very sentimental, and I think consequently, because of the context, it's all the more powerful for coming at that point in the record.
It's an interesting track in that it in one sense harks back to an earlier Porcupine Tree age, and I think a track like Trains is probably requested more than any other Porcupine Tree track, and yet it's a different sound to the last two albums, perhaps the last three albums, which obviously had a much greater metal influence in them. Do these styles reflect different aspects of your personality, or is this an evolution in the sound of Porcupine Tree that just hasn't finished yet?
You know what? I mean, the thing is, I'm always listening to music, always. And I think very often people ask me questions about why have you done this and why have you done that? And it's really not a self-conscious thing. It's not a conscious thing, I should say. It's almost certainly just down to the fact that my musical diet has changed. And to be honest, I haven't really heard a lot of metal music over the last couple of years that I've been particularly interested in. And there was a period for 4 or 5 years where there was, and you could definitely hear that creeping into the music and the influence creeping into the music. I haven't really heard anything that I particularly found inspiring in metal the last couple of years. And I suppose in a way I have started to kind of go back, perhaps because I turned 40, just before I started writing this album, which is a big landmark age to reach. And I think maybe in a way there is a sense of taking stock and looking back at all the music that's inspired me, and perhaps looking back again to this golden era of album rock music, the 70s, where I did draw most of my inspiration as a teenager from that era, and it was only later on that I really started to listen to other music. So that music is really in my DNA, and that kind of classic rock approach is really in my DNA. And so the other styles of music kind of come and go, very much depending on my musical diet or depending on what I happen to be excited about at any given moment. So while it wasn't a conscious thing, I can certainly recognize that this record does have a more kind of classic sound. Hopefully that means it's a more timeless kind of record as well. Time will tell.
Indeed.